Hulk Hogan wasn't just the face of an era, he was a master of never losing. In a world where taking the fall is part of the game, Hogan seemed completely immune to the idea. Whether facing legends or rising stars, Hogan always found a way to leave the ring with his hand raised. And if that meant ruining plans, rewriting finishes, or even derailing an entire show, so be it. Because Hogan is Hogan. And Hogan doesn't lose. 10. Jake, the Snake, Roberts, the threat Hulk Hogan wouldn't dare face. Jake, the Snake, Roberts has long been seen as one of the most brilliant minds and unique presences in pro wrestling. He didn't need size or brute strength. Jake captivated fans with his eerie calm, hypnotic whisper of a voice, and of course, the legendary DDT that every hardcore WWF fan remembers. But all of that made one man very uncomfortable, Hulk Hogan. In 1986, WWF began setting up a feud between Jake and Hogan, starting with a Snake Pit segment on WWF Challenge. In that scene, Jake hit Hogan with a DDT right in the studio, and the crowd erupted. But they weren't booing Jake, they were cheering like they'd just witnessed a revolution against the king of babyfaces himself. And that reaction changed everything. The overwhelmingly positive response to Jake shocked producers, but no one was more stunned than Hogan. The crowd turned on him. Not because they hated Hogan, but because they were drawn to Jake's aura of danger and mystery. Deep down, Hogan knew, if this story continued, Jake might steal the spotlight, and worse, take his place as the fans' top hero. So the whole angle was scrapped. That segment never aired officially. WWF quietly canceled the feud and shifted Jake into rivalries with Randy Savage and later Honky Tonk Man, a soft way to put out the fire. As for Hogan, he went back to feuding with less threatening opponents like Kamala, ones less likely to outshine him. When asked why the Roberts feud never happened, Hogan gave a seemingly harmless answer, "I didn't think it would sell tickets." But everyone knew what he really feared, not bad ticket sales, but losing the spotlight he'd spent years building. Jake, the Snake, Roberts never publicly criticized Hogan for this, but fans understood. In a world where egos often outweigh championship belts, Hogan's refusal to face Jake was a clear sign. There were some men even he knew he couldn't outshine. Not with strength, but with pure, bone-chilling presence and that deadly whisper that slithered like a snake around your neck. 9. Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig, perfect talent, but never fully recognized. If anyone ever truly deserved the name Mr. Perfect, it was Curt Hennig. More than just a world-class wrestler, Hennig had one of the most iconic gimmicks of the 1980s. With his flowing blonde hair, cocky swagger, and near-flawless in-ring skill, Mr. Perfect wasn't just a character. He was the embodiment of excellence, both on-screen and in real life. And that perfection, it was exactly what made Hulk Hogan uneasy. Debuting the Mr. Perfect persona in 1988, Hennig quickly built an undefeated streak on TV that lasted over a year, an unheard-of feat for a heel at the time. But as fans started paying serious attention to this streak, Hogan's radar started zeroing in. Teamed with a genius, a sly, cunning manager, Mr. Perfect set his sights on the WWF Championship. The genius even scored a count-out victory over Hogan in a shocking upset, and the duo destroyed Hogan's title belt on national television. Everything seemed set for an explosive rivalry between Hogan and Mr. Perfect. But instead of escalating, the story abruptly stopped. The 1990 Royal Rumble was the turning point. In the final moments, it came down to two men, Hogan and Hennig. No twist, no drama. Hogan eliminated Perfect and ended all hope for a major feud. Just months later, at WrestleMania 6, Hennig was booked against Brutus Beefcake, Hogan's real-life friend and not a main event player. The result? Mr. Perfect lost. So the question is, why was someone as talented as Curt Hennig kept out of the title picture? The answer is simpler than it seems. Hogan never saw Mr. Perfect as a big enough threat to share the spotlight. In Hogan's eyes, wrestlers like Hennig, technical masters with sharp presentation but not massive physiques, didn't bring the kind of physical danger that Hogan preferred in his big-money feuds. Hogan was known for going up against giants, Andre the Giant, King Kong Bundy, Earthquake, monstrous opponents that helped him sell the image of an underdog hero. But when it came to someone like Mr. Perfect, who could outshine him through pure skill and presence, Hogan didn't seem too eager. Even without a title feud against Hogan, Curt Hennig still made a lasting impact on fans. In a WWE universe where talent doesn't always equal opportunity, Mr. Perfect stands as a clear reminder. Sometimes, you can be too good to be allowed to rise. 8. Macho Man, Randy Savage, the close friend. Who got backstabbed? In the world of wrestling, no rivalry was more bitter, or more personal, than the one between Macho Man, Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan. This wasn't just a storyline feud, it spilled far beyond the ring and lasted for decades in real life. And when Savage dropped an entire rap album in 2003 just to diss Hogan, especially the track, Be a Man, it became clear, this went way beyond professional resentment. Randy Savage wasn't even trying to hide his disgust anymore. And honestly, he didn't have to. From the moment Savage won his first WWF Championship at WrestleMania 4, the spotlight that should have been his was immediately hijacked. By who? Of course, Hulk Hogan. In what should have been the biggest moment of Savage's career, Hogan forced himself into the celebration, raising Savage's hand like he had just won the title. It was like Hogan was his overbearing parent, refusing to let the grown-up kid stand alone in the spotlight. And this wasn't the first time Hogan had done it. Years earlier, he had refused to face Savage at WrestleMania 2, a decision that crushed Macho Man's dreams during his prime. Then later, Hogan agreed to drop the title to Andre the Giant, but only so he could win it back, not from Andre, but from Randy Savage. Yes, from the very man who once called him brother. When the Mega Powers were formed, the dream team of Hogan and Savage, many thought it was about unity. In truth, it was just another way for Hogan to stay front and center, even when he wasn't holding the belt. By SummerSlam 1989, WWE was building toward a one-on-one rematch between Savage and Hogan, but instead, it was replaced with a ridiculous tag match, Hogan and Brutus Beefcake versus Savage and Zeus. That's right, Zeus, an actor from Hogan's movie, not a real wrestler, and someone who didn't even know how to perform in the ring. The nightmare didn't stop there. At the Royal Rumble, Savage should have had a chance to reclaim the championship, but once again, Hogan inserted himself. The title shot went to Sergeant Slaughter instead, while Savage was pushed to the sidelines. Even after moving to WCW, Savage couldn't escape Hogan's shadow. Though he won the WCW title twice, both reigns lasted exactly one day, each time ended by Hogan's politics or sudden storyline shifts. If Randy Savage had ever tried to choke Hulk Hogan live on TV, no one would have blamed him. After years of being manipulated, sidelined, and robbed of the spotlight, dropping a rap album to vent his anger was actually the mildest thing he could have done. 7. The Ultimate Warrior. A loss that never really happened, if you ask Hogan. On paper, Hulk Hogan lost to the Ultimate Warrior at WrestleMania 6. But if you think that meant Hogan truly laid down to elevate the next generation, sorry, you're giving his generosity way too much credit. In that historic moment, Warrior pinned Hogan after a 3 count from referee Earl Hebner. But if you watch closely, you'll notice Hogan lifted his shoulder just as the ref's hand hit the mat for the 3rd time, a subtle way of signaling, I didn't really lose. I just didn't make it in time. And as if that wasn't enough, Hogan went on to steal Warrior's celebration by personally handing him the championship belt, as if to say, he's champion because I allowed it. No one called it a passing of the torch. It was more like Hogan grabbing the torch, pressing it to his own forehead, and declaring, I'm still the center of everything. For the Ultimate Warrior, even in victory, he couldn't escape the massive shadow of Hulk Hogan. And that shadow didn't end at WrestleMania 6. Years later, when both men returned to WCW, Warrior was brought back not because he still had value, but because Hogan wanted a bizarre revenge story to finally clear his conscience, long after anyone cared. Their rematch at Halloween Havoc 1998 was heavily hyped, but turned out to be a complete disaster. The match was clunky, lifeless, and so bad that fans felt like they'd wasted 15 minutes of their lives. But Hogan didn't care. He got what he wanted, a win to prove that last time was just a fluke. Even outside direct competition, Hogan always found ways to control Warrior's spotlight. Originally, SummerSlam 1991 was supposed to feature a one-on-one rematch between the two. But with Hogan holding the title at the time, and perhaps not eager to take another risk, the match was turned into a tag team bout, with Warrior and Hogan on the same side. A strange pairing no one asked for, but one that guaranteed Hogan wouldn't be overshadowed again. In the end, even though Warrior technically pinned Hogan at WrestleMania 6, in Hogan's mind, and through the behind-the-scenes power plays that followed, he never really lost. And that's exactly why Warrior could never truly escape his grasp, not even once. 6. Ric Flair, the legendary match that never happened at the right time. Putting Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan face-to-face in the early 90s was like placing two volcanoes side by side. No spark needed, the crowd would have exploded on its own. On one side, Nature Boy Ric Flair, the embodiment of luxury, cunning, and in-ring finesse. On the other, Hulk Hogan, the muscle-bound hero of the people, reigning atop the WWF throne. Their clash seemed destined to become one of wrestling's all-time dream matches, especially after Flair joined WWF in 1991 and won the 1992 Royal Rumble, widely considered one of the greatest victories ever. Everything was in place. Flair, calling himself the real world champion, versus Hogan at WrestleMania, a battle to determine wrestling's ultimate icon. But then, the unthinkable happened. The match never took place. Not due to injury. Not because of scheduling. But because neither man was willing to lose. Hogan wouldn't let Flair pin him. Flair had no intention of bowing to Hogan. Their egos were too massive. No one would back down. The result? WWF scrapped the plan and went in a different direction, leaving the dream match to fade into one of wrestling's biggest what-ifs. Strangely enough, despite all this, Ric Flair remained on good terms with Hogan. He even claimed to be one of the key people who encouraged Hogan to join WCW in 1994. But as the saying goes, a shark never stops smelling blood. Hogan entered WCW and, right on cue, won the championship from Flair in his debut match. The rematch? Nowhere to be found. Hogan later said the audience wasn't ready to see him drop the belt. A sweet-sounding excuse, but everyone knew it masked something deeper. When Hogan wasn't sure he'd come out on top, he simply didn't play. It wasn't until Uncensored in 1999 that Flair finally got his payback. He defeated Hogan and became WCW champion. But if you're expecting a triumphant, decisive win, think again. The referee's count was so fast that fans barely realized what happened. It felt more like Hogan temporarily allowed the win, as long as the narrative still revolved around him. Though both men were towering figures in wrestling history, Hogan and Flair's relationship was always shadowed by an unspoken rivalry. In a world where power and spotlight meant everything, sometimes a simple nod, or a refusal, could rewrite history. And as always, Hogan was the one holding the pen. 5. Bret Hart, the chosen one who was left out of the game. Imagine the ending of a modern-day WrestleMania. The main event just wrapped, the crowd's catching its breath, when suddenly, out comes The Rock. No build-up, no storyline, just him showing up, demanding a title match on the spot, and winning it in under a minute. No logic, no setup, just because he's The Rock and people love him. Hard to swallow, right? Well, that's exactly what happened at WrestleMania 9, except it wasn't The Rock, it was Hulk Hogan. And the one pushed out of the picture? Bret, the Hitman Hart. After a grueling year climbing to the top and earning the WWF Championship, Bret Hart lost to Yokozuna in a hard-fought match. But before fans could even process the ending, Hogan marched out like some kind of savior, demanded a title shot right then and there, and won in seconds. No explanation, no coherent storyline. Just because Hogan wanted it that way. Rumors have long suggested that Hogan refused to participate in the tag team match originally booked for him that night, unless he was allowed to end WrestleMania holding the title. And so the entire event was rewritten to satisfy one man's ego. As for Bret Hart, he was shoved into a supporting role in a story he'd worked all year to headline. Any hopes of a major showdown between Hart and Hogan were crushed. When asked about a potential match with Bret, Hogan casually dismissed the idea, saying Bret wasn't in his league. A cold response, one that didn't just dismiss Hart's hard work, but also shut the door on any chance for him to prove himself on the biggest stage. What made it worse was that Hogan had already left the company after WrestleMania 8 and was no longer its focal point. But once he returned, the rules shifted in his favor. Even when he finally lost the title back to Yokozuna at King of the Ring, it ended in pure farce, a ridiculous ringside camera explosion that left Hogan lying flat while fans looked on in confusion. And even in defeat, Hogan refused to give up the one thing that mattered most: acknowledgement. No handshake. No passing of the torch. No moment to elevate his successor, the way Andre the Giant had done for him at WrestleMania 3. If Andre had refused to do that for Hogan, Hulkamania might never have existed. There'd be no legends, no glory days to brag about. But when it was Hogan's turn to continue that tradition with Bret Hart, he turned his back. 4. Jeff Jarrett, the match that turned into a comedy no one asked for. Some wrestling stories just leave you scratching your head, wondering, what the hell did I just watch? And more often than not, if the whole thing feels like a mess, chances are Hulk Hogan had something to do with it. The Bash at the Beach 2000 debacle was one of those classic train wrecks, a kayfabe disaster broadcast live on TV, all thanks to a very familiar name, Hogan. According to one of many circulating accounts, Hogan had initially agreed to lose to then WCW champion Jeff Jarrett. Sounds reasonable, right? But not to Hogan. To him, things only made sense if he walked out the winner. On the day of the event, Hogan suddenly changed his mind and played his ultimate trump card, creative control. He demanded a win and insisted on leaving the show with the WCW championship. Because apparently, if Hulk Hogan isn't the center of the universe, that universe needs to be reset. Once the match started, it immediately descended into farce. Jeff Jarrett walked out, said nothing, and laid down flat in the ring like someone had pulled his batteries out. Hogan, looking confused and irritated, placed one foot on Jarrett for a half-hearted pinfall and won the title. The crowd was stunned, not in awe, but in disbelief. They had just watched kayfabe, the soul of pro wrestling, dragged out in front of the camera and shot in the head. And it didn't stop there. Right after the match, Hogan cut a scathing shoot promo, blasting WCW live on air before storming out of the arena. You'd think that would be the night's big dramatic finish, but nope. Vince Russo, WCW's notoriously chaotic head writer at the time, wasn't about to be outdone. He stormed out and delivered a fiery shoot promo of his own, exposing Hogan's outrageous demands and flat-out declaring that the championship was now vacated. Right there on the spot, Russo set up a new title match between Jeff Jarrett and Booker T. And this time, Booker T walked away with the gold. WCW ended the night with a new champion, a furious Hogan backstage, and a crowd that couldn't tell what was real and what was a work anymore. Things quickly spiraled from there. Hogan claimed he'd been double-crossed. Russo insisted everything was pre-planned. But through the entire circus of confusion and chaos, one fact remained crystal clear. Hulk Hogan never actually lost to Jeff Jarrett. And if you know Hogan, that's the only part that really mattered to him. 3. Shawn Michaels, when Grandpa Hogan stole the spotlight again. Age has never been a real obstacle for Hulk Hogan. If anything, it's just been an excuse for him to barge into the spotlight with smug confidence, like a grandpa storming the stage, shoving his grandkid aside just to wave at the crowd. And SummerSlam 2005 was perhaps the clearest example of that. After years away from the ring, Hogan suddenly returned and teamed up with Shawn Michaels in what was portrayed as a heartfelt partnership on TV. But of course, in Hogan's world, partnerships only exist to set up betrayals. Michaels inevitably turned heel, igniting what was billed as a legend versus legend clash, a battle between icons of two different eras. The original plan was simple. Hogan wins one match, Michaels wins the rematch, and they settle it all in a blockbuster rubber match. Classic formula. Fair for both. But then Hogan pulled a signature move. He made a non-negotiable demand. HBK had to play the villain. Because in Hogan's universe, there's only room for one crowd favorite, and it better be him. As if that wasn't enough, Hogan conveniently discovered a serious knee issue right before the show. He claimed he could only wrestle one match. No rematch, no part 2, no chance for Michaels to even the score. The excuse sounded like it came straight out of a teenager's excuse note to skip gym class, but unfortunately, it worked. And so, Michaels was forced into the heel role he never wanted. But if you thought Shawn would just play along and hand Hogan a clean, easy victory, you don't know HBK. In that match, Michaels turned in one of the most over-the-top sell jobs in wrestling history. He flopped around like he'd been electrocuted, flew across the ring like he'd slipped on a banana peel, and popped back up like a parody of Hulk Hogan himself. It wasn't lack of professionalism, it was calculated sarcasm. A sharp response to Hogan refusing to share the spotlight fairly. Shawn had been dragged into a one-sided showdown, so he flipped the script and turned it into performance art, a live-action satire titled Hogan, the Man Who Never Loses. And sure enough, Hogan got the win. But it wasn't the kind of victory that brings the house down. It was awkward, bitter, and left behind a stain in WWE history. A moment when one icon forced another to kneel, all in the name of preserving an ego that had long passed its expiration date. 2. Randy Orton, when the legend killer was powerless against a legend who refused to die. Randy Orton once carried the nickname, the Legend Killer, the man known for putting legends out to pasture. It wasn't just a catchy gimmick, it came with WWE's full backing. Nearly every major name from the past agreed to take the fall to elevate Orton as the next big thing. From Dusty Rhodes, Jake, the Snake Roberts, Sergeant Slaughter, Harley Race, and Ric Flair, all the way to Shawn Michaels, they all sacrificed for the rise of the Legend Killer. This slow-burning build took years, and it was all leading up to SummerSlam 2006, where Orton was set to face Hulk Hogan. It was a dream matchup in terms of symbolism, the fading light of the past clashing with the hungry flame of the future. More than anything, it was supposed to be the final piece of Orton's transformation. The moment he slayed the last legend standing. At first, Hogan agreed to do the honors and put Orton over. But because it's Hogan, things were never going to be that simple. He added one bizarre condition. WWE had to promote his daughter Brooke Hogan's debut music album, a record that, let's be honest, couldn't even be saved by auto-tune. Despite the odd demand, WWE said yes. They needed this moment for Orton. But as the event drew closer, Hogan, surprise, surprise, changed his mind. Once again, the ego of the then 53-year-old icon kicked in. Suddenly his knees hurt, his back ached, and Hogan declared he couldn't lose due to health concerns. Just like that, the script was torn up, years of build-up undone, and Hogan walked back into the spotlight once more. At SummerSlam 2006, a young, explosive, hungry Randy Orton was cleanly defeated by Hogan. No interference. No twists. No dramatic angle. Just Hogan strolling in, throwing a few punches, and winning. Right after the match, Hogan left the company. No rematch. No follow-up. No redemption arc for Orton. The Brooke Hogan promotion went nowhere, and Randy was sidelined like none of it had ever been planned. What can you even say? When even the Legend Killer can't put a legend to rest properly, maybe it's time we gave Hogan a new nickname. The man who simply won't die, both literally and figuratively. 1. Steve Austin, when the Texas Rattlesnake said no to Hulkamania. Before Hulk Hogan showed up and took control of everything in WCW, a rising star named Steve Austin was making a name for himself under the moniker Stunning Steve. At the time, Austin held the United States Championship, the second biggest title in WCW, and was clearly being positioned for a major feud with Ric Flair, who was then the world champion. But then Hogan hit WCW like a storm. And as always, everything that had been carefully planned was instantly tossed aside. The storyline between Flair and Austin? Scrapped without hesitation. Austin pushed to the sidelines, literally. Hogan's spotlight swallowed up everything in its path, leaving no room for anyone else, not even a fast-rising talent like Austin. Time passed, and the landscape changed. WCW was dead, Hogan had returned to WWE as a redeemed legend, and Steve Austin had become Stone Cold, the rebellious face of an entire generation. And that's when Hogan started playing the same old game again. This time, he wanted a dream match with Austin at WrestleMania 18, a clash between two of the biggest icons from two different eras. Sounds epic on paper, but there was one little problem. Hogan wanted to win. And Stone Cold? He flat out refused. No hesitation. No negotiation. No compromise. Because Austin wasn't the type to sacrifice his legacy just to feed someone else's oversized ego. After everything he'd witnessed in the business, especially Hogan's long history of always finding a way to put himself over, Austin had no interest in playing a rigged game. Later, Hogan tried again, pushing for another match in the mid-2000s, still with the same conditions. But the Texas Rattlesnake stood firm, not a chance. Especially after watching firsthand the comedy act Shawn Michaels was forced to put on in his match with Hogan in 2005. Seeing HBK flopping around like he'd been electrocuted by a soft punch was all the confirmation Austin needed. This wasn't a circus he wanted to be part of. So Stone Cold stayed out of it. And honestly, It might have been the smartest move he ever made. Because if Austin had said yes, the entire spotlight would have shifted to Hogan, and Stone Cold would have been reduced to a supporting role in his own story, something the Rattlesnake was never going to allow. From no-selling moves to last-minute finish changes, Hogan turned refusing to lose into an art form. Love it, hate it, or just plain curious? Drop a comment, hit like, and subscribe to Wrestling Sphere as we dive into the dark side behind the spotlight of pro wrestling.